This week, Merritt Maxim from Forrester is with us to discuss their 2024 Security Planning Report. Then Ryan Freed from Mandiant tells us how to get the most out of our tabletops. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Cato Networks raises an eye-watering $238 million with a $3 billion valuation. In this market, Hidden Layer raises $50 million to secure AI LLMs. CrowdStrike acquires Bionic.ai. Rumors about Palo Alto picking up Talon. Suspiciously terrible terms of service changes by tech companies. Why IT ops and security should get along better. Microsoft misplaces 38 terabytes of data. Petronas also goes after securing large language models. And a few latecomers to the news. We have some news about a failed SentinelOne acquisition by Cisco and a potentially successful acquisition of Splunk by Cisco. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Forrester is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Forrester's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Forrester's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Pawpaw Day. No, that is not your granddad. It's a fruit. This is episode 332, recorded on Thursday, 21st, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is the Master of Mobile, the Professor of Privileged Activity, Mr. Liam Neely. How are you doing?
Wow,
How are you, Liam?
It is wonderful to be here. It's a great change my day. It's just already lowering my stress points by stress level about 10 points. So I am looking forward to a great talk with Merritt and see what Forrester Research has been talking about.
So you were prescribed doing this podcast for your blood pressure, is what I'm hearing.
Pretty much. Thank you.
Very nice. Self prescribed.
Yes.
All right, and yeah, those are. If you haven't heard of a pawpaw, look it up. It's like a green kind of oblong, kind of looks like a squished oval lime in some ways. And they're common in Tennessee, and people either love them because they use them for something, or they hate them because they twist their ankle on them when they go to mow the lawn. Interesting fruit. As a member, so quick announcement here, as a member of the Security Weekly community, we are pleased to offer you 50% off your AIDC 2023 tickets using code CRA50OFF. That's CRA50OFF. Join us on October 4th, 2023 in Pentagon City. ICIT, the nation's #1 cybersecurity think tank, brings together America's leading minds to discuss AI's impact on the country. Register today at securityweekly.com/AIDC 2023. That sounds very interesting. That's I'm going to have to look those up later. I'm not familiar with those organizations. Yeah, a lot of interesting AI talk going on right now. But the talk we have going on today is with Forrester's 2024 Security Planning Report and one of its key authors, Merritt Maxim. Merritt is a VP and Research Director at Forrester and leads a team of analysts who cover IAM, endpoint, threat intel, and vulnerability management. Welcome, Merritt.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you here. Right. So yeah, maybe give us a little background on this report. How long have you been doing this report, and what gets you excited about it?
Yeah, sure. So this is the second year we've done this report. We do this across research. We don't just do it for security research. We do it for all of our major disciplines at Forrester. And this idea for this report came out of direct client feedback, where particularly for those whose fiscal year is the calendar year, the summer is usually when they start to do their capital budgeting for the following fiscal year. And we heard increasingly kind of feedback from them that they'd like more guidance about what are kind of the emerging technologies that are worth, investing some in the coming year, which are ones that are maybe not as valuable anymore that they could divest from and so forth. So the planning guide came to existence last year in its inaugural year as a way to help security people weed through all the various technologies and vendors that are out there to try to give our collective assessment across the entire Forrester Security and Risk Analyst team to kind of highlight what are the technologies that we see that we're bullish on, what are the ones that we're bearish on, and which are the ones that we're kind of sitting on the fence on. And the idea behind this report is to give those security and risk people guidance on that. And again, this will now be an annual report that we will continue to produce given the positive feedback we got last year. So we did it again this year, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
Yeah. Very good stuff. I'm a big fan of high level, kind of holistic approaches to understanding security. And, oftentimes it's easy to get stuck down rabbit holes or distracted by things. We're just talking about AI, a lot of hype going on with that. But to bring it all back, to bring all the fundamentals together and kind of discuss what's going on there, like some people might not see that as exciting, but that's, I think that's really where you're most likely to move the needle on things. Now I read off a list of what your folks cover with you as a research director. Is this report limited to that, or does it go beyond IAM, endpoint, the other technologies that I mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. It goes across my colleagues as well, so it's not just my team, but it's the other team. So it would include things like GRC technologies, other things that may be more on the risk side, as well as all the traditional network security or zero trust type tools, which is managed by another colleague of mine. But so this reflects not just my teams, but as I said, the entire Forrester research analyst community globally, which is about 25 analysts globally, and essentially we get together, early in July, and we kind of brainstorm and kind of come up with this list. And then that ultimately is what gets published in the report earlier in August.
Yeah. And we talked
about.
It
represents the full kind of spectrum of security technologies, and the ones that we say we're bullish on, and bearish on, that we're essentially giving hopefully a holistic view of all the possible technologies that are kind of within the purview of a traditional CISO at a organization today.
Right. Yeah. So the Wall Street Journal had an article the other day titled "Cybersecurity Budgets Aren't Untouchable," and that's actually one of the first topics that you tackle here in the report, talking about how spending is trending. So can we talk about that a little bit, about budgeting? I think traditionally security has gotten pretty much everything that they've asked for. Maybe not in every case, but if you were to average across the industry, security budgets have been growing for a long time. What are you seeing now with the market downturn that we saw last year? We've seen a lot of tech companies and even non-tech companies doing layoffs, and even security companies doing layoffs. What are you seeing in terms of budgets and spending?
Yeah, so I should state, as part of the planning guide exercise, we actually do field data from security decision makers on kind of their overall trends and themes around spending, not necessarily in the individual technologies, but more around, say, security services, security staffing, cloud security, on-prem security, etc. And so we have that information also in planning guide, and that does show some areas where Essentially, I'd say we see some areas where there's some flat spending. For instance, like security awareness and training, that came across as basically no one's planning to very few people are planning to increase it. It's going to essentially stay flat. Whereas things like cloud are showing a slightly higher uptick, and even things like staffing, we saw some decreases in staffing projected spending, and some of that is more a function of the kind of tight labor market than it are. So it's more of the reality of the situation than it is companies are saying that they don't need more staffing. It's just the reality that their ability to find, recruit, and retain staffing is harder. So therefore, they're maybe pulling back on that and either putting that money into, say, services or into somewhere else. So the overall security budget is still growing, but there are certain pockets that you'll see higher growth or lower growth based on kind of a typical CISO's perspective about the relative value of that technology itself.
I had a question.
So yeah, go ahead, Lee.
So I was, you're talking about the growth, and I'm just wondering, because we keep coming back to this, is the what do we want to call it? The talent gap, the ability to hire, pumping the brakes here, or is it really things are rolling forward anyway? Is it a big factor?
It is a factor. In our data, again, this was U.S. security decision makers only. 7% of them said they plan to decrease security staffing spending in the next 12 months. But some of those also showed a greater increase in spending on services. So some of it may just be they're still looking to have these services delivered, but they may be making the choice to have them delivered by a services partner as opposed to trying to do it internally purely from a staffing or other thing like that. So the staffing issue is definitely at play here, but I think there are workarounds, and that's no longer purely an excuse to say we can't find someone, so therefore we have to delay this project. I mean, there are ways to cross-train or recruit other people outside security that may have skill sets to actually help run and operate these things. And so it's not, the lack of staffing in and of itself shouldn't be the sole reason for why you choose not to deploy or manage a certain security technology in your organization.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of getting a sense here, a sense of a question at least. Are organizations starting to kind of separate winners and losers? Like we've seen some academic research showing that security awareness, at least certain types of security awareness training, could actually be more harmful than helpful. But in general, it sounds like some of this funding is moving around, maybe because folks are seeing, and I guess this is part of the question. Is it moving around because they're seeing more value from some product categories than others? Or is it more that, they're just trying to diversify? They don't actually know what's working better with others. They're just trying new things as they kind of keep the old things going, but aren't spending more on them.
Yeah, I think some of it is that they're with budgets getting tighter in this economic environment. There is, I think, greater scrutiny on security spending than there was a couple years ago, where it was kind of the wild, wild west, and with the kind of hybrid or remote work, or organizations really had to scramble and to do stuff, and so they spent money fairly aggressively. I think now you're seeing with the pullback in budgets, and certainly you've seen plenty of companies that have had layoffs or reductions in employment this year. Companies are saying, not necessarily saying that, I don't want to use the security technology. They're trying to quantify the value that they're getting out of security technology. And if the value of that investment is not up to a level, maybe they're going to decrease investment and apply that money somewhere else where they're going to be able to get a greater return. Now, it's often hard to, calculate the ROI of a given security technology, since a lot of it is really about preventing an attack. But I certainly see there is a greater scrutiny, not just from the CISOs, but from the CISO's boss and even at the board level now, to really understand the cybersecurity spending and, try and take a close look at it. And if there are some certain things like say training, for example, that maybe aren't generating the kind of value that you expected, maybe that money is going to now it's not necessarily going to be pulled back completely, but maybe you now look to reallocate that money somewhere else where maybe you can get a better return and get a better line of defense in your organization in the process.
And one of the things we've seen here is just a massive outsourcing, right? Like we've seen, in fact, we cover the market a lot. We look at funding and acquisitions, and the amount of funding and acquisitions we see, like small MSSPs getting consolidated and MDR firms popping up, it is just, I would say, probably 80% of the deals that we see are just these services. And it seems more and more people are outsourcing these, but I'm not sure I'm seeing a whole lot of, again, to talk about the actual efficacy, and the value along with these. Certainly it saves you having to hire talent, and it saves you having to deal with learning curves and implementation and all those headaches. But what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of managed services and people moving stuff in and out of, managing it directly within the organization?
I think the kind of managed services certainly are still a big part of the cybersecurity ecosystem. I think the kind of company's tolerance or appetite, if you will, for managed services is somewhat a function of a couple things. One could be the size. Smaller companies may have smaller staffing, and therefore their ability to kind of build an organic team to do all this may be more limited, and therefore services may be a better option. It could also be a geographic. If you're operating in an area that maybe there's not a deep pool of kind of technical talent available for you to hire yourself, that you have to rely on a service provider as well. So I think that's some of what's driving that. That doesn't mean that large companies don't still avail themselves of using MSSPs, but I think some of those characteristics that I described play a role, and that's why you see some of that consolidation at the lower end, as some of these MSSPs try to go after that kind of mid segment. Companies in like the 2,000 to 5,000 employee range that are still large, multi-$100 million companies, but just may not have a huge IT staff that they can manage to do all this themselves.
And another question I had around this was I think when cloud first came out and we started to see SaaS applications, there were a lot of predictions of organizations getting rid of their data centers, getting rid of their on-prem stuff. But as we've seen recently, like there's been massive impact of companies who sell basically FTP software getting compromised, and in the news, seeing that stuff get compromised, we can clearly see that didn't happen. There's still a lot of in-house gear and stuff like that security teams have to worry about and IT teams have to manage and take care of. What have you seen? What's the kind of thinking around there? How do security teams prioritize, or how are you recommending that they prioritize with regards to workloads in the cloud and SaaS applications versus things that the legacy stuff they still have on-prem? And is it fair to call that stuff still legacy? Do we still see that stuff disappearing, or does it look like it's just going to stay there forever?
Yeah, I think we're stuck with the term legacy, whether we like it or not. I think the operative word for the modern enterprise today is hybrid. Certainly the growth and the push is to do more and more things in the cloud, but there may be certain systems or applications for which there is not an equivalent alternative that operates in the cloud. Maybe an on-prem, order management or fulfillment system that's been used by organizations for decades. It runs on, say, a mainframe or some other system like that. It works, it's scalable, and that there isn't necessarily an easy business case made for why that goes to the cloud. And we see this in our client interactions all the time, where there's definitely interest and high demand for cloud-based systems, but there's also a growing realization that there are some systems that may just never be suitable for the cloud, which means companies are going to be in this hybrid model, which is why even in our Data for this Planning Guide, we do still show that there is still spending going to maintaining on-prem security technologies. It may not be increasing necessarily, but they're not completely pulling the plug on that stuff. And so I think that hybrid model is been here for a while, and it's going to persist. Some companies will be more aggressive at trying to get as much in the cloud as possible, but even those scenarios, there's always going to be certain applications that just may not be suitable for cloud, and there'll be this kind of hybrid mode that organizations will have to manage on for the foreseeable future.
So, as I was skimming through the report, which I'm thinking of. I already was thinking of who I would share it with when I'm going through it. By the way, thank you. I got the impression that there was a certain amount of activity that I was characterizing, no offense to anybody, as cleanup. There was a lot of rapid adoption done in the last year, but we didn't retire the old or fully get out of or do everything we were supposed to, putting in the security measures, turning off old services, all those sorts of things. Is that a correct assumption, or is that am I reading too much into there?
No, I think there's some aspect of that, and certainly in the plan guide, we do call out, third-party risk management as a growth area. And again, Adrian mentioned some of those kind of FTP type related breaches. I mean, that's essentially a third-party issue now that organizations unfortunately have had to be made aware of because of breaches. And so that is, I think, open your eyes that they do need a full assessment of their assets, of their APIs, what they're connecting with, how vulnerable all those systems. And it used to be that you would, send out some kind of a, supplier checklist, if you will, once a year. That was kind of manual. We're seeing growing interest in try how you automate that, because companies do realize, they need to integrate and interact with other third parties as part of being operating in the 21st century. But in so doing, they do expose themselves to some risk. So how do we mitigate that? And that's where, these three third party risk management tools come into play to kind of helping mitigate that. And I think that's very much going to be a reality for most CISOs going forward, is to understand where all these systems are, what they're connecting to, and making sure that you're not unnecessarily exposed by some API that was created 10 years ago that people forgot about, that is actually still exposed to the internet and could be compromised by hackers.
Actually, yeah, those old legacy in a different context, things from we did in the past that we solved problems. I can think about how many times I did them in the past, and I hope none of them are still around. But I'm hoping a modern CISO is looking. So. You also mentioned AI in quite a few places, and where I come from, we're working on guidance for how to use it right and what to do with it, as well as investigating. Are the folks looking at adoption? Are they looking at guidance, or is it something else? I mean, it's all the buzzwords everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's definitely everywhere, and we see it a lot. And from a security risk standpoint, there we have there's multiple angles on which AI plays a role. One is in the creation of AI bots or other things that can actually promulgate either social engineering attacks or other things like that, using data to make phishing emails that appear very realistic. So one is how I defend against. Because essentially AI used for evil, and the flip side of that is AI used for good. So I use AI to look for anomalous activity in my network, to identify attackers kind of before they can do things. So it's really those two kind of forks. I think, unfortunately, AI being used for evil is probably going to be mature faster than AI for good is. But that vendors are actively trying to address that. So I think that's where we're at today. And it also means the security. If you're using, say, training data, making sure that the data integrity becomes a big part of this, right? So how do I ensure that the training data I'm using in my AI system hasn't been compromised or hasn't been somehow manipulated, so it generates a faulty output that may then lead to a different decision and therefore creates more risk or vulnerability. So unfortunately, we're really still in the early stages of understanding how AI can kind of wreak havoc here, but it's definitely going to be, it is on there. If it's not already, should be on the radar of every CISO globally today, and understanding how to defend against it, but then also how it could actually be leveraged to help better improve detection, prevention, and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you'd say something like that, because I think it's intriguing, even though wherever we are on the maturity, I don't think ignoring it is the right answer. It definitely seems like Correct. It's so.
Yeah, in terms of one of the things we highlight in the report, that again, this is one example of how AI can be used for good, is this concept of AI generated synthetic data. So, and the idea here is that you use AI to essentially create, data that looks like real customer data, but it's actually not. But the point is, it now allows your marketing teams or other people to actually work with data in ways that doesn't put them in the crosshairs of privacy regulators, things like that. Because previously you might have to have relied on production or actual real customer data to do some of this testing. And with the AI, you can now generate synthetic data that avoids that issue. And there's a lot of opportunity for, say, security and marketing teams to now work together to do that, to, as I said, minimize kind of privacy uses or abuses of actual real customer data. So that's one example we call out that is an example of AI being used for good.
Yeah. Oh, I think these are exciting times. I little personal background. When I was in college, I tried to write a natural language parser as a senior project, and I made some bonehead programming mistakes, but it was hard. And I look at what's out there now; it's like, holy mackerel! They really come a long way. And I'm hoping we can really leverage the engines behind it to increase our capabilities. I wanted to switch topics a little bit. One of the bullets in your report talks about consent management, and just the other day I was looking at how in California they're passing, will pass a right to delete for data brokers. I was wondering, it looks like people really are paying attention to privacy requirements and all that stuff, even if they are confusing. Is that a good consensus, or are people really waking up to all of that?
I think they are. And again, some of that was driven initially by GDPR, but we now are seeing the emergence of, in the U.S., certain state-specific privacy regulations. You mentioned one in California. I'm aware of several other states. I think Washington State has one in discussion, Massachusetts, there's a bunch of them. So that is now, I think, pushing U.S. organizations that may not have had to worry about GDPR now paying attention to that. So, and I think they're aware because of the fines and things that can come about because of GDPR and privacy regulations. Consent management is something that they're paying more attention to. And fortunately, there are a range of providers that exist to help companies kind of better manage that and get a handle on that to ensure that their users are, in fact, following the proper regulations when it comes to consent management in terms of how data is going to be used or shared.
That's good news. I'm sure it's confusing as all get out if you haven't been paying attention to it. But the GDPR was, I remember when GDPR came, we first started looking at it and whether it applied to our area. And then when the California Privacy Act came out, it was very similar until our lawyers pointed out the difference. Is the average CISO smart enough to hire a lawyer to help figure this stuff out, or are they trying to go for it on their own?
It's a good question. I think part of the challenge with things like consent management is this is one area that may or may not be within the purview of the CISO. It may actually be under the purview of the chief privacy officer, chief legal counsel, and possibly even someone outside of IT, depending on the organization. So, they may be the ones who actually drive their kind of procurement and evaluation and deployment of that solution. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that as a CISO, you may have less involvement with the consent management than you do with other technologies. So I think that's depending on kind of where the organization is. If they handle customer data and interact with customer data, that they're aware that this is something they need to pay attention to. And I would say if CISOs are being asked to do that, that's fine. But I would encourage them, if they have someone who manages privacy or other things in the organization, to integrate and collaborate with those individuals, because they can play a really important role in making sure that your approach to consent management isn't running afoul of any regulations or other business requirements that you may have.
Yeah, well, I really agree with your comment there. I mean, we were looking at some of the changes, and I had picked up some of them, and then my general counsel said, "Oh, but did you see these 7 things that we need to worry about?" I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, and I am very fortunate to have a legal team to support me. And it wasn't just them, by the way. Other organizations get involved too, as you said. It's not just an IT thing. We have to work together on that one, because the consequence of getting it wrong. So Zero Trust shows up in your report. I'm on the fence on Zero Trust. Some parts of it I absolutely love. Some parts I just plug my nose. What's the general sense on Zero Trust out there? I mean, I agree the moat and castle thing is outdated. But is it making traction? Is it going to make a difference?
So, yeah, I would agree with you that there continues to be, philosophical questions about people who like Zero Trust or not. We certainly see a lot of vendor interest in it. I'd say some customers continue to be confused by Zero Trust in the sense, we have to tell them Zero Trust isn't really a product or something you deploy. It's a solution. It's an architecture. It's a way you go about security. And in a lot of organizations, that's actually that can be quite a significant organizational shift. Certainly, I think the U.S. federal sector is one, again, partially because of the Biden administration has pushed out a bunch of executive orders around Zero Trust. That's really where I'd say there's the most kind of interest and demand right now, and there's actually a lot of funding behind it. And so I think that's certainly one area where there's a lot of interest in Zero Trust. And as with anything with the federal government, anytime they're doing something, there's always that spillover effect that they may start to influence private industry as well, because private industry, when they interact with the government, they may have to, do certain things that prove they're meeting kind of Zero Trust tenets. So I think that's, if I was to kind of say where is Zero Trust really growing the most, I think the federal sector is where we see a lot of growth and opportunity, but it still has relevance for private enterprises as well. But it is also something that is not achievable overnight. It requires, a lot of effort. And in many cases, you may already be doing Zero Trust things without even realizing it. If you're doing, two-factor authentication or privileged identity management, I mean, those are Zero Trust principles behind those products. So you may already be, leveraging some Zero Trust principles without even realizing it. So I think that's kind of where we're at today. But there's definitely a lot of growth and opportunity there. And vendors are eagerly, I think, evolving their solutions to help address some of those specific use cases around Zero Trust.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, there's some exciting stuff there, and it has the potential to make the way we do security easier. Because some of the stuff that we work so hard to shut down will be shut pre-connection, decided it doesn't work. With all the cloud adoption, I'm obviously in the federal space. You probably derived that by now, and I have the luxury of using FedRAMP solutions, which makes security a lot easier in terms of figuring out how to control it. How is the private sector doing in that space with securing all these apps and stuff? Are they reliant on various posture assessment and cloud, or are they able to get their arms around the controls to secure their cloud services? I mean, what's it like in the real world?
Yeah, in the private sector, I think, given that we continue to see breaches revolving around cloud services, suggests that it is still an ongoing challenge. And it usually is it relates to a configuration, a permission was given that should have been given, or a storage bucket was left open when it should have been. And that's why you do see, what we really just call the SPM, the security posture management solutions that are emerging, whether it's, and there's a bunch of acronyms that play here. There's cloud security posture management.
DSPM, correct. SSPM.
And I think those are all going to ultimately be converged, either acquired by larger cloud providers, but they do provide a lot of value by helping scan your system, looking for those config changes, looking for permissions or entitlement drift, and helping to improve those. So there's a lot of interest and value there. But that market is going to converge around a kind of single posture management solution that kind of does all the things that the CSPM, DSPM, CIM do today, but that's still going to take a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one interesting challenge there that I'm curious of your opinion on. With a lot of SaaS services, there are, I think this is one of the first times that we see IT doesn't own software, right? Like if your HR uses a SaaS system, something like Bamboo or something like that, maybe IT isn't even involved in that decision. You might see some departments going out, they decide they need Figma or they need Canva, on the design and marketing side of things. Do you see that being a considerable challenge for security teams, is even figuring out who owns these things, who these admins are? Well, I imagine it's somewhat in IT. challenge as well, since they might want to pull that stuff back in, or do they not? Do they just let these departments own their own stuff?
No, there's a different challenge there, and right, we first initially had shadow IT, which was individual users just going to Dropbox or wherever and just putting files in there that they shouldn't be in. So that's where you had solutions like cloud security gateways that would then go out and identify uses of shadow IT. Now we have kind of department shadow IT, like you said, where HR decides that they want to use a cloud-based system, and IT may be involved in the procurement and maybe even a certain extent on the deployment, but IT may have very little input on the evaluation and assessment. In other words, if there are certain security features that IT is looking for, they may have some ability to influence that, but they're not just driving that discussion. And in many cases, if the purchase goes ahead, now IT is forced to kind of figure out how to mitigate those risks. So, but I do think organizations are getting smarter about that. They are more security aware that these are issues, and so I wouldn't say they're doing these things blindly without concern for what security implications are before they make a deployment purchase. But there is very much a need for the CISO to be visible and to interact across the organization, to be aware of these initiatives. So if in fact there is something that's going out for tender RFP, they have some input over things to make sure that security considerations are being part of the evaluation.
And all this stuff, everything's got an API now, right? So is that kind of the key behind all these posture management tools and pulling all this stuff together, at least from a visibility standpoint? So it's kind of like the first half of my question. Then the second half of my question is also with APIs, you can control things. So that is that kind of the answer? If my organization has 1,000 SaaS apps, is the only way, or I'm using 3 different public clouds. Is the only way that you manage all that stuff with some kind of posture management tool that connects to everything through API and manages policies and guardrails and stuff like that through an API.
Yeah, I think the key thing you mentioned is the multiple cloud providers. I mean, I mentioned hybrid is the kind of operative word for IT. The other operative word is multi-cloud. Most companies are in fact using multiple cloud providers, and that's part of the reason why these posture management solutions exist, because while there may be very good configuration management within an individual cloud provider's offering, they're not as strong at evaluating competing cloud configuration systems. So that's why these kind of independent offerings help do that by applying the same kind of search and assessment across different cloud providers to make sure that even if you're committed to say you're primarily using AWS, but using Azure for some things, to make sure that the configurations are consistent across the board. And that's part of the reason why these posture management solutions exist, is that companies need essentially consistency across the clouds that they're using. And these posture management solutions help them realize that in ways that they can't necessarily get natively from the cloud providers themselves.
Yeah, and another trend that I've noticed, you already mentioned what I've seen referred to as privacy engineering. You were talking about AI generating data that functions and looks like customer data, but it's not actually customer data. So it's not a big deal if it gets compromised or something like that. It makes it a little bit easier to hand it off to developers and engineers and let them use it. Also in the report you mentioned consent management. I've also seen a ton of startups around identity verification, and as the host of a podcast that focuses a lot on the market, I've had the challenge of thinking, like, is this stuff really cybersecurity? Should we be covering this? Is it security teams that are heading this kind of stuff up, or does it also branch into legal and some other departments as well?
It definitely branches. Certainly, if you're a large customer-facing organization, you probably have a chief privacy officer, and so the things like consent management and stuff like that are often within the purview of that individual. But that individual, usually or should be working closely with the CISO to make sure that they are on board on things. There are obviously often legal requirements or issues at play here that maybe the CISO is not as well aware of, but which the privacy officer or like chief counsel can help with. So it does, I think, reflect the increasing scope of the CISO, but some of the privacy stuff may not fully be kind of within the full responsibility of the CISO may not be within their budget. And so, but since that data can in fact still represent a risk, the CISO needs to be involved in managing and being on top of that.
Yeah, and
So
as we're kind of winding down on time here, yeah, Lee, I want to let you ask that question. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
So as I was looking through this and all the stuff, I was thinking, when you were putting all of this report together, were there any surprises of like, this wasn't covered, or holy crap, they're looking at this kind of thing? Any, like I said, anything that caught you off guard?
I think anything caught us off guard. I mean, I do think one of the areas that I'd say are bearish on would be kind of on-prem appliances, whether they are secure web gateways, IPS, secure email gateways, and some of that is for the fact that there have been some 0 days against some of those types of appliances this year. In some cases, they don't even enable. There really is no easy fix, and so that I think to us was further evidence that some of these on-prem hardware appliances may not be suitable, and that you may be able to get equivalent capabilities in a broader networking play that may be cloud host or something like that to avoid that. So that's I wouldn't necessarily say it was surprising, but it was consistent with kind of what we had seen given the some of the 0 days that have been announced against a bunch of the standalone hardware appliances in this year.
Yeah, MOVEit comes to mind among others. Go ahead.
What was that, Lee? I missed that.
I was going to say, when you mentioned hardware appliance, I thought about the MOVEit breach and the Barracuda email gateway.
Yeah, and that's in here too. This report wastes no time or space. It's very efficient in hitting pretty much everything I'd want to ask about, and I'm not going to have a chance to ask everything about it. So, folks who are listening to this are just going to have to go check out the report for the rest. Merritt, this has been really interesting and thought-provoking, and I love how much ground we're able to cover here. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk tabletop exercises with Ryan Freed from Mandiant.